Good evening, folks. Here we are again, as promised. Another segment of attempting to read something for you all. And this one is called Across the Caribbean. It was done by Podbake Productions. And it was the first. Following this was the Jewels of the Caribbean. But Lyndon, in this book here, this was done in 2011. And I should read actually what Lyndon wrote on this opening, one of these pages here. I'm going to read this. I think it's really worth repeating. I promise to be brief and honest. Podbake's 2009 to 10 Caribbean short story competition is the brainchild of generosity and selfishness. In 2008, I published my first book, and wherever I'm out there struggling to market it along with my other releases, I meet writers who claim they are dying to get published oh so badly, but there's simply no opportunity. Naturally, as a publisher, writer, and baby entrepreneur, I reasoned that such an offering could benefit us both. Although I promoted the competition via the internet only, the response was fantastic. There were entries from Guyana, Barbados, St. Lucia, and other dots on the map. Caribbean people living in faraway lands submitted stories. Even Europeans, Africans, and South Americans entered despite their nationality. When the deadline came at the end of August, we had over 50 stories. I remember. It was quite a heap of stories. To our disappointment, more than half didn't meet the word count requirement. But that's not the interesting part. Among the remaining stories, there was a rainbow of writing styles, creativity, themes, and in some cases, unfortunately, the lack of these things of which I myself am sometimes also guilty. The competition committed to publishing 17 short stories. The Only Man and Secret Love were written by the winner, Raymond Yusuf of Guyana. The other 15 stirred the judges in one way or another. Today you have the chance to read them yourself and become a judge, for this book, perhaps the first of its kind, is an eclectic snapshot of Caribbean literature. This was written by Lyndon Baptiste, and it gives the genesis of the thought of, there were little opportunity really for Caribbean aspirants to really get their work out there. So then this became his brainchild, our brainchild, to really put books out there that carried the signature of West Indians who would not really be able to afford publishing. And that's how the thought came about that we should do something. And I appreciate what Lyndon did. He launched out bravely. I can't say that there were sponsors for this, this venture, but it really created an opportunity for West Indian writers to, have a crack at it. The cover is pretty. Shows 3 youngsters there in the river. A real Caribbean flavor. So tonight I'm going to try to read a little from that winning author, Raymond Yusuf, and it's called The Only Man. I don't know that I can do too much of justice tonight, considering the time has gone, but I will go as far as I can. Louise is not able to join me at the moment. She's taking a call, but when she comes, I believe she will get into the act. So I'll start. He couldn't understand why such an erudite oncologist would choose to settle in such a poor, backward, unknown country. The salary must be absolutely none, he thought, as he stared blankly at the naked stucco walls of the waiting room. His face was serenely languid this morning, almost melancholy, and his deep inset eyes lacked interest. He had lost all the zeal of a 45-year-old man. Now, he sat waiting on his appointment with the doctor. He picked up an old copy of the National Geographic magazine and studied the picture on the cover. It was interesting, yet it was ugly to some degree. He brushed through the contents of the magazine on the cover, rested down in its place, and decided it was not fitting for him to read of such things, at least not now. Again he tapped the large brown envelope on his leg, sighing as he waited. The agony of waiting building up in him like a piston under pressure. The content of the envelope made a scrunching sound that made him stop. He looked up to the Portuguese nurse, an awfully slender girl with exiguous fingers. That word slips me really. I need to look it up sometime. He looked up to the Portuguese nurse, an awfully slender girl with exiguous fingers, activating herself on the telephone, laughing, chatting, giggling. And whenever she saw a doctor coming, she would exhort a comportment of busyness. He simply couldn't sit in the lounge and wait anymore. Moreover, watch the girl play with time so recklessly. This was too much for any one man to handle. He got up and moved to the window, a frail finger gently resting upon his pale lips. The nurse noticed him and with a casual smile called out to him, "He should be here any minute. Wouldn't you prefer to have a seat?" He paid her no attention, but allowed his eyes to fall upon the jumbled buildingscape of the old clustered city. In the not-so-far distance, sirens wailed and horns honked continuously. He was about to ask the nurse how long he had to wait, but she cut him short. "The doctor will see you now," she said casually, pointing to a door while covering the speaker of the phone with one hand. The door was labeled Dr. A. Nash, MD, MBBS, specialist in oncology. He lent her an urbane smile and entered the cold room. The doctor, stylishly spectacled, robed in white and stethoscoped, was sitting behind a large glass-top desk, piled high with pastel-colored papers and a few books here and there, lending the atmosphere of a research student. He was singing the Eagles' Hotel California, and when the words didn't come as they used to, he hummed blissfully. Behind him, a window framed a portion of the majestic, coffee-colored Demerara River with floating cargo ships that resembled chocolate-smothered wafers. On the wall adjacent, certificates awarded from prestigious American, British, and German universities, old and new, peopled the bold blood wall. "Please sit down," the doctor said, motioning the chair before his desk. His American accent, after 20 years, still confirmed his nationality. His American accent, after 20 years, still confirmed the nationality. "Good afternoon," he supplicated indolently. The doctor made himself comfortable as he narrowed in on his patient. "I was told you are the best." Dr. Nash allowed an obsequious smile. "We share different views," Dr. Nash, now modest, said. "What is it that troubles you?" "I have cancer of the prostate," he said, handing the learned doctor the films and the envelope. "I have traveled the continental U.S., and all they could do was recommend someone daring enough." The doctor assessed the man slightly as he collected the x-rays. "How long ago were?" the doctor asked when he cut him. 2 weeks ago." Nash studied the x-rays behind white light. He skipped the first 2 films without much interest, but by the 3rd one he stretched out his head, squinted his eyes, widened them, and stared with disbelief, a heron scrupulously evaluating its prey. The man in the chair was indifferent. The erudite doctor had never seen such a case. The doctor, pondering ponderously, sat down. "I have never seen anything like this. I know, doctor. Everyone says that. I have seen some of the best men there are in the field. How long have 3 months now? He answered the doctor. The tumor is metastasizing quite quickly, the doctor said, his eyes forlornly intent. It was Professor Lake of Columbia who told me of you, he said. Lake, the doctor nodded his head. Dr. Lake Ram? We did research together at Columbia. You're not an American, are you, Mr. Ray? No, doctor, no Canadian. Why are you asking? The doctor looked at him askance. I feel as though I know you from somewhere. At least you have some semblance to someone. The doctor trailed off. But I just can't say who. Mr. Ray laughed a weak, delicate laugh. Perhaps we knew each other in the next life. The doctor agreed and smiled. I will want to study these films more and take a few more. Good, that's good, Mr. Ray added. I am well off, doctor, and I'm willing to take all the chances there are. Dr. Nash walked over to the window opposite him. Outside, beyond the corrugated roof of the northern wing, a garden of bright brick-red ixoras and bougainvillea, laden with white and magenta, amethyst and carrot orange-colored bracts colonized the fence and trellises. A black-skinned, sweaty Indian gardener was meticulously shearing a wall of needle-leaf white pines. Chartreuse brimstones, butterflies fluttered prolifically from flowers to bracts. Georgetown was walking that day. In the not-so-far distance, half a mile, the strident cries of an ambulance pierced the nucleus of the atmosphere. The doctor's mind, for a moment, was split on both the persnickety man in the flower garden and the lackluster one in his office. Now he felt isolated in a world of cold words, of which he had to choose. He didn't know how to explain the complications of such a tumor. In his lifetime, he had seen boxes of films of cancerous growths, many inexplicable, some outlandishly bizarre, and few that made his big eyes watered. But this particular one provoked the core of everything he knew on the subject of malignancy. The cancer itself seemed as though it was afflicted by a cancer of its own. How do you feel physically? The doctor asked, moving away from the window to sit in his chair. I have had better days, the patient answered delicately, to the point to which he was being nonchalant. The pain occurs mostly during urination, and often I feel a cutting pain along the pelvis. The doctor agreed. That will be. More so, you should also feel discomfort to your back and the need to urinate frequently. It's already happening. What is your response to radiation therapy? The frail man bowed his head as though he was jostling with a response that would signal the doctor of his pain and fatigue, both physically and emotionally. Not good. I am on hormone therapy, but this too is useless. Indeed, Dr. Nash said, nodding his head as he was surprised by the patient's knowledge. We shall have to take some more films. I will send these to Dr. Rahman Yusuf, a specialist based at the Cancer Institute of America. We will seek his recommendations. How come you missed him? There was a spot of silence, and the space between the two men seemed heavy with anxiety. I did not. The films were taken by him. The patient allowed his words to dangle, hyperbolizing their extent. It was he who recommended Dr. Ram. The doctor ate the answer with a gesture of the head and studied the films for a third time. Gently, he smacked in an exiguous, well-manicured finger against his thin lips, while his eyes were set in deep concentration. He picked up one of the films and returned to the X-ray light. then took up a magnifying glass and began studying the roots of the malignancy. Now, under magnification, the cancerous splotch appeared as a faultless round, clouded with blackness, density, and from it the root strands grew out like the crisscrossing tributaries of an ancient river. I'll have some water to drink with this story, boy. Once he gives the green light, the doctor said, moving about agitatedly as though he was tense, we will travel to the US to operate. But I thought, the impatient patient implored. There was another long pause. Neither patient nor doctor knew what to say. The silence broke almost with an oddity. I will pay, Mr. Ray said, raising his eyes to look at the doctor. I will pay generously. I would like you to understand, Dr. Nash said. Now his intent was on ensuring that his patient believed him. It's not going to be the money. It's all going to be the Guyana Cancer Institute. Again, it's all going to the Guyana Cancer Institute. Again, the patient displayed an air of indifference. For now, leave these with me. I will study them in oncology, Dr. Nash said, gathering the films and placing them into the large envelope. I want you to come by tomorrow, 10:15. I will have the x-rays taken then. The patient stood up at the doctor's queue and the two men shook hands. It was then the doctor noticed him. How simply he was dressed. Sky blue shirt and khaki pants. His face looked dreadfully sick, emaciated. The black roots of his beard were beginning to expose more than their naked bodies. They were beginning to make him look like grain waste. 10:15 would do quite fine, the patient said, and exited the office. His head was jammed. He waited on the elevator and couldn't tell if it were the clattering and groping of the elevator itself, or if it were his brain trying to compensate him on the illness that the doctor had suggested to him. Now he felt truly hopeless. Everything around him seemed a blur. Everything moved in slow motion, even the ding of the elevator. The stainless steel doors that were stained with sweat marks and attrition drew open, and a nurse with buxom breasts, thick arms and legs, and a thick face exited as he entered. Her smell was overpowering, a goatish sweat. She greeted him, this rare white man in a colored world. He didn't notice her, and she swore inaudibly as she moved down the corridor of the hospital. Again the elevator bell dinged, but he was only aware of this when a raucous throng of commuters had rushed through the doors. He smiled level-headedly as he exited. His head was teeming with a black bag of silly thoughts that seemed like folded origami ornaments. For a moment he didn't know where he was or why he was there, and had to sit down to muse over his state of being. Even this proved to be quite a task. Now a lone log, drifting from the confluence of sanity and disease into the anonymous sea, he was thinking of everyone, his only younger brother who had died early at the age of 32 of pancreatic cancer, of his mother and father consumed by death one dark rainy evening while driving home from the movies. After some time he drew himself together and moved over to the receptionist counter. She was a pretty girl, her face covered with needless pink, gaudy rouge and facial powder. Her thin lips, neat and moist, were neatly painted with red. He smiled down at her and asked her whether she could oblige him a piece of paper and an envelope. She smiled, and willingly she conceded. Mr. Ray moved over to a counter of the reception counter, unburdened by the call of patients and their relatives and slow traffic of the hospital. He set his mind on what he was writing and only raised his eyes when he was certain that he had mentioned what he truly wanted to say. Would you be kind enough to deliver this to Dr. Nash when time permits you? He said nicely and offered her $100 American. The receptionist, in pretentious modesty, refused the money, but deep down inside of her she wanted every cent of it. He insisted. She conceded this time. He thanked her. She thanked him. He smiled a wry, hopeless smile and walked away. The receptionist, extremely jubilant, wasted no time in delivering the letter. Outside, he stopped to look at the lush tropical garden. It seemed as though it were an animated painting, for the colors, flamboyant in all senses, seemed to spring out and smother him. The gardener, resting under the shade of an adolescent royal palm, was wiping the sweat from his thick brows with the back of his big, hairy hand. The gardener noticed his unconscious stare. Too often he had seen it. He walked over to him and offered him a sprig of the brick red bougainvillea. Inside him, his despair seemed to take on a different root. He sniffed the flowers and smelled nothing. No fragrance, no scent, no nothing. His only body, the very one he had cared for with utter verve, ceased to operate. The partnership deed between body and mind had liquefied. He moved out of the compound, and the heavy, clamorous cries of sirens assaulted his ears. Vehicles whizzed by, throwing the hot wind, their waste in his face. He coughed unhealthily, and his eyes watered thin tears. Unexpectedly, there was a disastrous blaring of horns, the piercing screech of brakes, and a heavy crash. "Oh, lad, accident!" a lawless woman screamed raucously as she raced to the dying man. "Oh, me God!" an African woman vending not far from the scene of the accident shouted. "He dead!" Zealous and noisy onlookers alike rushed swiftly to the scene, which was now piling into a tumult of people scurrying and hurrying. And like army red ants that had sensed that one of their fellows was under attack, the gurney aides dashed to the site, fighting their way into the core of the pandemonium. "Is suicide," the African woman hollered, her face measured up with worries and fear. "Accident," another woman screamed. "Is suicide," the African woman, now hysterical and truculent, shouted as she moved up hastily to the woman, who screamed, "Accident." The gardener, now at the scene, touched the patient's forehead and drew his hands over his eyes. Drops of blood ran down his nose. The gardener, saddened by the event, picked up the flower, shook his head sadly, and walked away. Dr. Nash, unaware of everything, was reading for the third time the note the receptionist had just delivered to him. "Dear Dr. Nash, I do not think I should keep our appointment tomorrow. Everyone keeps sending me to Dr. Yusuf, renowned oncologist. I must say, I simply can't go to him. I just cannot operate on myself. Doctor, I am Dr. Rahman Yusuf, MD, FRCS. Thank you for your time, and I deeply regret this course of mine. Ever yours, Dr. R. Yusuf, MD." What a fantastic story. And I had the privilege back in 2000, what did I say? In 2011, of meeting Raymond Yusuf. He had come to Trinidad to collect his first prize money and a copy of the book. And I met him. A very unassuming person. I think he was a teacher. I think he is, if he's still alive, a teacher. We never did follow-up contact. But he wrote quite a story here. I'm sorry, Mama Lou was supposed to join me, but she conked out, it looked like. So I'm all alone in this job here. But don't forget, we are thinking of, in the new year, if it meets the approval of any out there, of having some readings. You know, maybe we could do it in Cora there. Maybe we could do it here in Trin City. It would be a good idea to do it either place. And maybe whoever is coming, I would say about 10 people would be fine. I often get a little puzzled, you know. In the express days, they used to tell us, the Englishmen who came to oversee things, used to say, you know, if you're writing between 1 and 10, you say 10 persons. Once you cross 10, you say 10 people. You say 11 people. Well, I'm not sure about that. But I like the idea of 10 persons coming. So we're thinking about this. And if I have to do a nightly reading, I really want to, and Louise and I share the same thought, if we could bring a little reading to the channel, the YouTube channel, read a story for you, perhaps, ever so often. Maybe I can do it. I was thinking of maybe just Thursday and Friday. Just Thursday and Friday. Wednesday's a little awkward. Monday and Tuesday, I think folks going back to work might be a little hard pressed. So maybe Thursday and Friday might be okay. I don't know what you think, but you could give me an idea which days might be better. I would opt for Thursday and Friday. So I hope, friends, that you understand what we did at Potbake here. People who couldn't get their stories into the big publishers. We compiled, and as Lyndon wrote, there was entrants from all over the world. And we did 17 got into this. I believe 15 got into Jewels of the Caribbean. So I could read from here, I could read from Jewels of the Caribbean. I don't have any copy of Boy Days because that was Lyndon's brainwave also. But it would be nice to really, I want to again mention Sabia. I think she's a poetess. And her husband Frankie. I understand she has some lovely work. So maybe sometime she might be included in those 10. So my friends, have a good, safe weekend. Be careful out there. And thank you for being patient as I would have read. Thank you, and I'll say good night.